Welcome to the MLB Slate Breakdown. I'm Jason Gilbo, JGilbo11. With me is the audio version of Josh Shepardson at BChad50, taking a little break from showing his beautiful face on air. We're breaking down today's slate, and it's a fun one. It's after a couple of downer slates these last 2 days. This one's looking pretty good.
Yeah, I'm a big fan because we got a mix of good pitching at the top. We got some bad pitching at the bottom, which means that you've got multiple avenues to creating rosters. You can build your bat happy rosters. You can load up on pitching if you're on DraftKings. Maybe grab your top play plus a Jaime Garcia for 9,000 and change. So a lot of different ways to attack this slate. You're not sick to your stomach picking a starting pitcher because the options are all so bad, and few stacks around the league that you can really get behind and like a lot. So really a lot of different elements to tonight's slate. It all starts with the Tampa Bay Baltimore game in Baltimore at 7:05. Chris Archer, the best pitcher on the slate, but he's not our cash games favorite. Price considered. He's not a huge betting favorite. The game does have a low over-under total. And in this contest, it's actually got one of my favorite GPP plays, Chris Tillman, especially on DraftKings where you can use him as he's the seventh cheapest SP on there. So you can use him as your SP2 with your top cash games play and have a ton of money to spend on the big bats and some of these more stackable games. The reason I like Tillman mostly, partly the fact that Vegas has a low over-under total on this, partly that he's only a small underdog, partly that the Rays for a middle-of-the-pack offense against right-handed pitchers and project to be average, some days better, some days a little worse this year. But Tillman was firing gas in the first game of the year. I checked out his Brooks baseball player card, and they had him averaging almost 95 miles an hour on that four-seam fastball. Now, I don't know if they were so in tune with the weather that they gave Chris Tillman the old heads up, you're only going to get a few innings in. Go ahead and cut it loose like he's a reliever. That would certainly impact the velocity. But if you went out there and was just throwing seeds, and we've got some newfound fastball velocity for Chris Tillman, he's a really interesting arm because he's got that hammer curve to follow it up. He got 4 swinging misses on that four-seam fastball on just 15 thrown. So it was really just blowing guys away. So I think that's something that's easy to overlook for gamers. Like I said, I didn't notice it until I really broke down the Brooks information and hopped on his player card to see the pitch FX data and kind of find out why he was getting all these strikeouts. It's Chris Tillman. He's been pretty mediocre the last few years at best and bad last year. But as far as the hitters go in this one, not going to be using any Baltimore Orioles, not even to be contrarian. I mean, I guess you can always point to Chris Davis as having a chance of reaching the seats, but as a swing and miss pitcher or hitter facing a guy like Archer, I want no part of that. Same with Pedro Alvarez. I'll just go ahead and pass on all the Baltimore hitters. You can call it contrarian to stack the O's against Archer. I call it foolish and lighting your money on fire. But I know that you like the other side of this one.
Yeah, I mean, as much as you were talking about Tillman, his upgraded velocity possibly, which is something to keep note on, especially moving forward. You look at the Rays, they are a middle-of-the-pack offense. They do have some nice bats up top, and the one thing is they're cheap. So I think if you want to get really contrarian tonight, you can look at a Rays stack up front 1 through 5, and maybe even Souza as well, just if he slips up a little higher. But guys like Dickerson, Longoria, Tillman had reverse splits last year. Allowed a 353 WOBA to right-handers. Was a bit tough on lefties, but overall, I mean, Camden Yards is a friendly park to hitters. I think the Rays getting out of the Trop, getting here can get them some boost. Dickerson's hit, pretty well to start the season. So I think overall, I think this is a GPP team to target only. None of these Rays will be in my cash games whatsoever, but there are some interesting one-offs as well as a pretty decent value stack.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that assessment. I mean, obviously, if that fastball velocity reverts back to its 92-mile-per-hour self, then we saw what Chris Tillman did last year, and it was not pretty. It's a mid-4 to high-4 ERA, not a lot of bat missing. And as you noted, these Rays are getting a break from their pitcher-friendly home ballpark and getting to hit at Camden Yards, which not only enhances home runs, but also enhances run scoring. So with those value plays, with that pricing there, too, you can get their starter, Chris Archer. And if you're on DraftKings, you get those cheap Rays in a stack. Get Archer and Liriano together on the same team conceivably and still get yourself a stack that can score some runs. So I like that call a lot. Next up is 7:07 start time. That's Joe Kelly and the Boston Red Sox playing at the Toronto Blue Jays and Marcus Stroman. And Joe Kelly got to be crying into his beer, realizing that he got washed out of facing the Cleveland Indians, and now he has to face that righty-heavy Toronto Blue Jays lineup. And Kelly has been hammered by righties, has a reverse platoon split for his career. So that puts all of these Blue Jays righties in play. I think that they're a really nice stack because they are expensive. They'll force you to own a cheaper SP, which a lot of people get uneasy feelings about, but also all the Chicago Cubs love. They are so expensive as well. You're not going to be able to really crisscross these stacks of the Blue Jays and Cubs. So if you're looking for, it's almost unbelievable coming off of last year that Toronto could be something of the number 2 stack behind the Cubbies. I mean, last year it was Blue Jays, Blue Jays, Blue Jays. And granted, everybody knows to get them in there against lefties, but against Kelly with these reverse platoon splits, you got guys like Bautista and Edwin Encarnacion who hammer righties for their career. They have very small platoon splits as it stands. They can already hammer righties anyway. They get a guy who gives it up a lot to righties. They make for a really nice stack. You can get them as one-offs too, but their pricing, I think, makes them more of GPP plays than cash games guys, just because there are some chalkier plays. You are going to want to get those top arms in your cash games lineup. So I'm looking at these Blue Jays as more of a GPP options, just because there isn't that cheap cash games guy that can allow you to squeeze these guys into your lineup. But the one name that I will have in all cash in cash games and GPPs alike is Russell Martin. I especially like him if they take the precautionary route of sitting Josh Donaldson tonight. John Gibbons did say that he could start tonight. This was yesterday, I believe. RotoWire or RotoWorld had some notes from him that said that Donaldson could play tonight. But I mean, it's early in the season. If they decide that he's taking batting practice before the game and hamstring's still a little, or calf's still a little bit tight, give him the night off. Russell Martin is built for that 2 spot in the lineup. High OBP, hits right-handed pitching pretty hard. So if he gets that lineup bump, that's a nice boost to his value. But even if he doesn't, priced affordably on both FanDuel and DraftKings, you can easily get him into your cash games lineups. And then from the Boston side of things, I'm not picking on Marcus Stroman at all. I mean, you could use David Ortiz conceivably. It is Rogers Center, great ballpark factors for left-handed batters, and Ortiz is awesome. But the first base is so deep, you'd only be looking to use him as a single bullet or maybe a couple bullets in GPPs.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. I mean, Ortiz isn't always a guy on my radar, not because I'm a Sox fan, but just because this guy can take the above-average pitcher deep, just because he's that clutch of a hitter, just that guy who – he makes you pay for your mistakes. But as far as the Toronto side, I mean, that's really where I'm looking tonight. And I love the Martin call, especially if he slides up into the lineup. Kelly allowed a 365 WOBA to right-handers last season. Obviously heading into the Rogers Center, pretty friendly ballpark for hitters. So, yeah, I think the only thing that kind of keeps people away is that price tag of all those guys. I think, just with the Cubbies buzz, I think Houston's going to get some love as well out in Miller Park. I mean, I'm curious to see if they're going to be a little more contrarian than they usually would go for tonight.
Yeah, same here. Next up, we've got the 7:10 start time of Pittsburgh and Francisco Liriano at Cincinnati against Alfredo Simon. I believe it's Simon these days. It's been Simone at times. I don't know how he pronounces his last name anymore. I do know he's a pretty garbagey pitcher, and I do know that I like Francisco Liriano opposing him and a Reds offense that is probably going to be below average this year against lefties. They were around average last year, but they got some bingo squares in their lineup. Guys like Adam Duvall, even Billy Hamilton's just trash as a hitter. So some free outs for Francisco Liriano are pretty darn close to it. Sometimes Liriano's control takes away those free outs, but he works around it. I mean, the first start's a perfect example. 6 innings pitched, 0 earned, 5 walks, 10 strikeouts. The guy gets a ton of strikeouts. His ground ball rate is perfect for Great American Ballpark, so I'm not really worried about any home run concerns there. Gets Votto lefty, so your best hitter in that lineup, granted, still well above average even against lefties. At least he holds a platoon advantage against him, so that's a plus. Jay Bruce lost against lefties, so one of their other better hitters and guy who's off to a fast start is going to be neutralized by Francisco Liriano. Considering price difference between him and Archer, I do think he is I don't want to say clear-cut because Archer is fantastic and he is consistent, but definitely an easier chalk play as the SP top SP in cash games than you would think maybe for a guy that's got some bouts of wildness and usually is maybe makes you a little uncomfortable to use a guy like that can rack up a pitch count early. But the matchup, the price, everything looks really good for Liriano. From the Pirates side of things, you can get some of the left-handed bats in there, maybe a Gregory Polanco, even some of the righties, because the ballpark factors are nice again in Cincinnati. But I really don't love any of their hitters. They would really only be considerations in GPPs for me tonight because I think there are some much more favorable situations. And one other thing worth mentioning, does look like there is going to be some weather out there, but it doesn't seem like it's as concerning as some of the other weather and some of these other ballparks, but definitely something to keep an eye on since it is fairly early in the day as we're recording this, and any time that there's concerns of rain or possible delays, especially if you're looking at your top cash games arm, those delays become even more disturbing, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's probably going to feed into the Pittsburgh low ownership tonight. Just because, I mean, you look at it, they are in a good spot against Alfredo Simon. He does struggle against left-handers more than right-handers, but, I mean, really a 14.3% strikeout rate last year. He doesn't miss a ton of bats. I do like Polanco just as kind of a swerve off some popular names in that price area. He's going to get a favorable park factor. The matchup's solid. He's, hitting well pretty through these first three games. Outside of that, I think you can look at McCutchen. I think you can look at Starling Marte as well. Marte kind of slipped in price a little bit. I don't mind him in GPPs, but outside of that, I mean, I agree with everything. Liriano is my guy tonight just because you get that little discount and just a much friendlier matchup against Cincinnati.
Yeah, and a pretty big betting favorite as well, so that's definitely nice too. Next up, we got St. Louis at Atlanta. Jaime Garcia against Matthew Whistler. And Garcia is really my favorite SP2 on DraftKings to use with Liriano in cash games. I'm not as enamored with him on FanDuel. But as far as the hitters go, gotta love any lefty in that St. Louis lineup tonight. The one that obviously comes to mind is Matt Carpenter, their leadoff hitter. To me, he is the cornerstone piece in cash game lineups in terms of hitters. Price considered, there's another big bopper in the outfield that you and I both love that kills lefties, but Carpenter cheaper on both sides, really easy to squeeze in at third base. And Matthew Whistler was absolutely tattooed by left-handed batters last year. Gave up over a 400 WOBA and over a 500 slugging to lefties. Carpenter's newfound power will play well against that 500 slugging allowed by Whistler. Some other names to look at in that game, Colton Wong. Don't love the lineup spot. He was actually sat in one game against a lefty, so there is some platoon danger that if they bring in a lefty, you can see Wong go to the bench. But priced nicely on DraftKings, and not the worst price tag on FanDuel either, though. The second base option's really cheap on FanDuel, so I'm less inclined to use him there. You could use one of the first basemen, Matt Adams, or Brandon Moss if they're playing, but I just think that the position's too deep. There are some guys in some better ballparks that I like better. But certainly for GPPs, you're looking to be a little bit different. Grab one of those guys. And that's the direction I'm looking. As far as the Atlanta side of things, there is one name that I'm considering, and it would be GPP only. It's at the same position that Matt Carpenter plays, which is obviously you're going to be giving up a really big bat to get him in there, but that's Adonis Garcia. Absolutely killed left-handed pitching last year. Really hit them for power. The power really wasn't something we saw in the upper minors with him, but he's at least shown it in the Venezuelan Winter League, so that counts for something. Hit for power in Cuba, but that was quite a while ago. That was before coming to the States and actually pitching for a few years in the minors. So really grabbing for straws there. If you want to completely explain his power, you can. It kind of came out of nowhere, but he's already homered this year, homered off of Max Scherzer. So I do think that maybe this could be a 15 to 20 home run guy, which is definitely a different expectation than most had coming into the year. So getting him against Garcia with that favorable platoon split could pay off big time, especially since he's so darn cheap on both FanDuel and DraftKings. Gives you monster salary relief to load up on some bats at some other positions.
Yeah, it's a good call there, especially on the night we were kind of looking to be a little bit contrarian in GPPs, and he is cheap. 4 hits through the first 2 games there. He definitely has some upside with that pop that you mentioned. Um, Definitely in agreement with Garcia. Outside of that, I think I'm looking at Carpenter, and that's about it from this Cardinals offense. Just because they're priced a little bit higher than I would like as far as taking shots with GPP picks, and I think Carpenter's really the only one that really catches my eye.
Yeah, and I mean some of those best bats in the Atlanta lineup or in the St. Louis lineup, guys like Matt Holliday, Randall Grichuk, they're righties, and that's not obviously favorable for facing Whistler. So I completely agree with you. Next game is the 8:10 start time, and that is Houston at Milwaukee. Scott Feldman against Chase Anderson. As you noted, I think that this is going to be a popular stacking destination with the Astros. Chase Anderson gives it up to lefties, gives it up to righties, actually holds more of a reverse platoon split, really favorable hitting environment in Miller Park. The guys that I'm looking at in this one, obviously Carlos Correa, but he is priced for GPP usage only. He is very expensive on both sites, but the upside is obviously through the roof. So it's certainly understandable if you want to get a couple shares of him in GPPs. Jason Castro behind the dish, if you're looking to move off of Russell Martin, maybe get some salary relief. Has left-handed power, good ballpark for left-handed power there in Miller Park. Colby Rasmus, you could say the same, but the outfield's so loaded that I don't love using a spot on Colby Rasmus, though. If you're going to fire a bullet, better fire a bullet with a guy that can reach the seats. Colby Rasmus can do that. You look around the rest of the team, George Springer has big upside, but I also like some of the Milwaukee hitters because Scott Feldman really gets hit hard by right-handed batters, does not miss a lot of bats. That puts Chris Carter in play for me in GPPs on DraftKings at least as a really cheap option at first base. So if you can't miss bats, Chris Carter can hit the ball a long way. Domingo Santana is one of my favorite plays in any game anywhere. He's hitting leadoff for the Brewers. He's really cheap. He's got good park factors, and Scott Feldman, not really the type of pitcher that can exploit the swing and miss in Domingo Santana's game. So really love him. He's going to be a staple of a lot of my rosters tonight just to get me some of those other big bats plus my top arm. And then other than that, that's pretty much going to wrap it up. Who are you looking at tonight?
Yeah, I definitely agree with there. I think that Astros stack is one that I'm definitely going to be eyeing tonight. And you mentioned some of the big names. Of course, Correa, doesn't need much explanation for why he's, going to be a popular pick tonight. Rasmus, he's kind of that boomer bust guy, but the guy hits the ball hard, 34% hard ball rate last year against right-handed pitching. Big 243 ISO, but he does have a high strikeout rate, which you're going to get with most of these Astros guys anyway. And I do like those Milwaukee calls. I think no one's going to be picking on them tonight, and Feldman is a guy who can serve it up from time to time, and he did last year against right-handers. So favorable matchup. I think you got Vegas having it at a 9 over/under there. So I think it's a pretty good spot to get kind of out of that Cubs Diamondbacks game, or maybe sprinkle a few into that mix as well.
Yeah, and that's definitely important. Is sprinkling something else in there. I mean, obviously a Cub stack can certainly lead you to the top of the GPP, but you're going to be fighting with a lot of other people, and you're going to have to hit your other picks. So maybe swing in one of these guys at a position where there's a popular Cub in, swing one of these guys in instead just to be a little bit different and separate yourself from the field. And obviously Vegas agrees with us with that 9 over/under total. Got to love that. Next up, Minnesota at Kansas City. It's going to be Irvin Santana against Yordano Ventura. Not really liking a lot of the bats in this one. Not in love with the arms either. It's just kind of a meh game. It's in Kansas City, which does have slightly favorable hitter park factors for runs scored, but does suppress home runs. So it's kind of, again, a meh venue. It's nothing super exciting. Ventura, when he's on, can really miss bats, can play really well, but isn't the most consistent arm in the world. The name that I like best in this one is really just a value guy, a glue guy, and that's Alex Gordon. Good numbers against righties for his career. Irvin Santana was hit hard by left-handers last year, and is a guy who doesn't really need to hit the ball out of the ballpark for value. I'm looking at that left-handed park factor of 104 for runs scored, and realizing that Gordon's a guy that can hit it to the gap, doesn't have to clear the fences to really tap into his power. So the fact that the ballpark suppresses home runs doesn't hurt him as much as maybe a big bopper. Other names that you can get the other lefties in play as well, but problem is Eric Hosmer and Kendrys Morales play first base, and there are just better options at first base tonight. So not in love with them. And then from the Minnesota side of things, Miguel Sano is always in play just because the guy can reach the seats. But third base is loaded tonight. Outfield's loaded tonight, depending on whether you're on DraftKings or FanDuel. He's third base eligible on DraftKings, outfield eligible on FanDuel. Don't love the opportunity cost that it costs to roster him. You have to give up a really great player in a more favorable situation. So really, to me, he's more of just a one-off. You can use him as a single bullet in a GPP, but I really wouldn't go crazy just because you've got some other really strong options.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the one thing that turns me off of Yordan Ventura is just because of the pricing, that he's too close to Jaime Garcia for me. Otherwise, I would like him a little bit more tonight. I still think he's actually a decent GPP target just because he does offer a high strikeout upside, especially against this Minnesota team that does carry a high strikeout rate. But I'm with you. I mean, I don't think I'll be targeting any hitters in this game. I know Sano still pretty cheap on FanDuel, but he's in that outfield spot, which I think I just like a ton of more guys.
Yeah, and that's the biggest problem. I mean, it's not that we dislike Sano, but when you have to give up one of those Cubs outfielders, or a David Peralta, or a Jose Bautista, or a Nelson Cruz, or a Franklin Gutierrez, and the list goes on and on, to squeeze him in there with a non-plus matchup in a non-great ballpark, it's like, why are you doing it? So with you, I mean, really GPP consideration only in that Minnesota-Kansas City game. Next up is the game that we've been kind of teasing all show, 9:40 start time. Jason Hammel and the Cubbies against Robbie Ray and the Diamondbacks. Cubs are probably going to be your most popular stack, but for me, and it is a great stack, don't get me wrong, I like some one-offs in this one. A lot of their best bats are left-handed, guys like Jason Hayward, Anthony Rizzo. Kyle Schwarber, I don't imagine he'll play tonight. Hurt his ankle last night. Looks like it. Last check, it was just a sprain, but I'm guessing as badly as he looked like he was hurting, they'll probably give him a few days to kind of get that ankle right, which means maybe you see Jorge Soler in the outfield, which is interesting if he's out there because it's a righty against Robbie Ray. May have been out there anyway, even if Schwarber was healthy, because it does look like they're going to sit him against some lefties. They did in their first matchup against the Angels. So Soler could be a really off-the-radar piece from that game. But the guys that I like the most in this one are Chris Bryant as a GPP swerve off of Matt Carpenter. Still going to have high ownership because he's part of the Cubbies. But Matt Carpenter, to me, is the chalk at third base, so it's going to cut into that ownership for Bryant a little bit. Ben Zobrist is a guy that I love. He's pretty close to that. I won't say must-play territory, but on FanDuel, he's so cheap and he's priced so close to guys like Chase Utley, Joe Panik, and the other top options at second base that I don't know how you can get away from him with that Cubs total of 9.5 total for the game. The park factors in Chase Field, Robbie Ray getting hit hard by righties. I mean, Ben Zobrist kills lefties. The list goes on and on. Favorable lineup spot. And then Dexter Fowler is a guy that you and I both love. Switch hitter, leads things off, dynamic at the top of the order. Hits for more power against righties, but overall much better against lefties. Great table setter, over a 400 on-base percentage since 2013 against lefties. That is exactly what you want in this game where there's a lot of run scoring projected. He doesn't even have to do a lot of damage at the top of the order. Just get on and you're going to score runs, and that's points, points, points. So love Dexter Fowler. You can use Anthony Rizzo in the lefty-lefty matchup because the guy hammers lefties now. Really turned it around last year. But for me, for cash games lineups, the guys that I'm looking at mostly are going to be Zobrist, Fowler, and then that's pretty much it from the Cubs. For GPPs, though, chase that ceiling. I'm completely fine with using some lefty-lefty matchups, using Chris Bryant and paying up for him from Matt Carpenter. And from the Diamondback side of things, it's David Peralta, and that's pretty much the only name that I'm really looking at. Maybe Socrates Brito if he is in the lineup, but it sounds like it's not a true platoon split. Listening to the Diamondbacks broadcast last night, Steve Berthiaume was saying that it's more of a feel thing for the manager, that it's not truly a lefty-righty thing where Owings is only going to play against lefties and Brito is only going to play against righties. But you would think with the way that Hammel is much tougher on righties than lefties with that fastball-slider combination that it would be a Brito showing in the outfield tonight. He's super cheap, but he also takes up an outfield spot, which the position's loaded tonight, and there are some other value plays. So I don't love it. He'd only be a GPP consideration. Peralta, on the other hand, strong play in all game types, priced affordably on both FanDuel and DraftKings, killing righties again this year. was a monster last night. Reached base all 4 times he got up, pair of doubles, triple. He's come out of the gate hot. Last year, he built on his numbers, his already strong numbers against righties from his rookie season in 2014. So I love David Peralta, one of my favorite plays on the slate tonight.
Yep, I'm definitely in agreement there. All those names, Robbie Ray, nothing really special. He was hit hard at home, especially last season, over a 4.5 ERA, allowed a 355 WOBA. Right-handed bats, just absolutely crushed him. 38% hard ball rate. You're looking at a couple guys that are lefties on that team, but as you mentioned, Rizzo crushes left-handers now. Zobus, Fowler, both, hit well from the right side against lefties. Hayward's the odd man out, but it's kind of a bummer that he's hitting up top because it kind of messes with that stack a little bit. But overall, I think they're all great plays. I think the Fowler price tag on FanDuel at 3,100 is just a must play in cash games. And same with Zobrist. Those are just tremendous value plays right there.
Yeah, it costs you a whopping $5,800 to roster the combination of Fowler and Zobrist. Go ahead and lock them into your cash games. Not only are you getting 2 really good plays, but you are getting huge salary relief from 2 guys that are well above average. So really love those calls. I think that they're must in cash games on FanDuel. Next up, we got Texas at Los Angeles or California, the Angels, wherever they're playing these days, however they want to word it. AJ Griffin against Matt Shoemaker. Shoemaker, kind of an interesting GPP play because he was much better at home than on the road last year, was better in the second half than the first half, but don't love him. AJ Griffin hasn't thrown a major league pitch since 2013, got in just a handful of starts in the minors last year, had Tommy John surgery in 2014, was only an okay pitcher before that, was hit hard by righties in terms of slugging, and that puts one name on the radar specifically for me, and that's Albert Pujols at first base, especially on FanDuel where he's under $3,000. Really nice matchup for him. Pujols, at this point, hits right-handers harder than left-handers, so you're going to get that nice platoon split for him. Obviously, Mike Trout, you can always consider him in GPPs, not a necessary expenditure in cash games at all. But for facing a guy like AJ Griffin, who's been out of the big leagues for a while, going to have some rust to shake off, certainly makes for an interesting target for those guys, but also makes the Angels something of a kind of sneaky stack with some of their bats, maybe a Cole Calhoun sprinkled in there as well. Nobody's going to be on this game. It isn't a pitcher-friendly venue, so I certainly wouldn't go crazy stacking these guys at all. But if you're going to stick out, double-digit GPP roster, stick an Angel stack in there just because they're going to be solo owned. And AJ Griffin, at this point, we really don't know what we're going to get. And he was merely an average-ish pitcher before the Tommy John surgery. And, he's at the back of the rotation for the Rangers now. They clearly aren't happy. It sounds like towards the end of the spring they were shopping for a new 5th starter anyway, talking with the Indians. So I think that kind of tells you what you need to know about their feelings on AJ Griffin as well. On the Rangers side of things, gotta love Shin-Soo Choo against Matt Shoemaker. Fastball slider guy. Actually was hit harder by righties than lefties last year, but you'd expect a guy with his pitch mix to eventually be hit harder by lefties than righties. So like Choo there, Choo hits right-handed pitching very hard. Don't like Prince Fielder just because of the depth of first base. It is a good matchup, and Shoemaker gives up a lot of fly balls and home runs. So there, it could pay off, but not a route that I'm going to go. But Rougned Odor, I guess, would be the other name to throw out there. Again, Shoemaker's fly ball tendencies make him a home run threat. And he would be very different at second base. So that's a GPP play where you're going to get some low ownership, especially since he hits down order. But really, these are just GPP considerations. Nobody in this game that I'm looking at is a must in cash games. Choose about the closest thing to a strong cash games play. But just because of the depth of the outfield options and the pricing for some other guys, he's going to be an odd man out for me tonight.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely with you there. I think if this game was in Texas, I'd be much more inclined to take some Rangers bats and some Angels bats. I do like the Cole Calhoun mention, just because he's a guy who's one of the cheaper Angels guys, and he hits right-handed pitching pretty well. Overall, this is an Angels team I can never get right as far as offense goes, and that even goes for Mike Trout sometimes. So I probably won't be playing any, so maybe you should put some into your lineups because that means they might do something tonight.
I know that feeling too well. Next up, we've got Oakland at Seattle. Eric Surkamp against Taijuan Walker, and this is another matchup with one of those really bad pitchers on the slate. Eric Surkamp made his debut with the Giants back in 2011, has under 60 innings pitched in the big league, so he's kind of been an up and down guy, had missed some time, was used as a reliever at times, back in the rotation now, but he is a great target to pick on. It goes without saying, get your Nelson Cruz shares. I mean, he can be budgeted for. He is not cheap, but you find a way to get him in there against a below average lefty like Eric Surkamp. Franklin Gutierrez is in play. Really hasn't delivered for our hype on him yet, but hit left-handed pitching hard last year, has hit it hard throughout his career. He is in danger of losing that late at-bat when a lefty comes in or a righty comes in. Unfortunately, I thought that wouldn't be the case because he is a plus defender in the corner, and he did hit right-handed pitching well, but they did lift him for a pinch hitter for Seth Smith in the last start for Gutierrez. So you can't count on him definitely giving you the full complement of at-bats, and that makes him a GPP-only consideration, but a cheap one that'll let you get some big bats in your lineup. So I'm okay with that. And Chris Iannetta is the other name that I always like to mention when Seattle faces a lefty. Iannetta, big numbers against left-handed pitching throughout his career, even outside of Colorado once he's moved on to Los Angeles and here, still hitting lefties very hard. So that Surkamp matchup's a plus for him. The other side of things, Taijuan Walker looks like a GPP play to me. Don't love his price tag on DraftKings. Do like it more on FanDuel. Unfortunately, you only get to use the one pitcher on FanDuel, so that's going to curb his ownership a little bit for me. But especially since the A's don't really strike out a ton. But Walker was really good in terms of strikeout rate, walk rate, and ERA estimators. Biggest problem for him last year was he gave up a few too many homers. He's in a ballpark that should help suppress that tonight in Seattle. And then you've got the fact that he also had some issues with strand rate, and that's something that we can't peg as a definite issue at this point. Doesn't have a lengthy track record of struggling with stranding runners, so that's something that could normalize here this year. So with those considerations, it does make for a GPP play. From the Oakland side of things, not really liking anybody in this one. I mean, you could use Billy Burns at the top of the order. He does have speed. He is going to hold the platoon advantage against Walker as a switch hitter. Stephen Vogt, maybe. He is left-handed, so he'll hold the platoon advantage there. But in Seattle, not a huge fan of any of them, really.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. I think Reddick's another name to toss in to GPP consideration just because he has some nice pop. But back to the Seattle side, I mean, I'm all over them tonight. I like that Nelson Cruz call. Obviously, he's just the guy who's going to be a lock for me. And if you really want to get weird, I like Kyle Seager tonight. He hit lefties really well last season. 357 WOBA, 214 ISO. Obviously, gets a matchup against the lefty in Safeco. So the power factors aren't really there with him, but I mean, he is a really, really interesting service, especially if you're tossing in multiple lineups.
Yeah, and the nice thing with him is you can run out that Seattle stack and use him and Cruz and Gutierrez and Iannetta and get yourself a nice little four-man stack that's very affordable and will allow you to maybe cross-stack them with the Cubbies or somebody else or the Blue Jays and still get yourself a nice pitcher in there. Last contest of the night is the Dodgers at the Giants. Ross Stripling making his first major league start. Hasn't pitched above Double-A. Pitched less than 100 innings Double-A level last year. Against Matt Cain, who is at this point really zombie Matt Cain, shell of what he used to be. Not got hammered by lefties last year. The big thing to note here is that there are some weather concerns, but this is one that is hours and hours and hours away. So obviously monitor that. Things can change between now and then. But because it is that late start time, you really want to know what that weather is. You don't want to get stuck eating zeros if you're on FanDuel and sticking in guys without that late swap. But analyzing this from what they can do if they get it in perspective, like the Giants hitters against Stripling, Stripling profiles as a back of the rotation starter. That's the kind of guy that I would expect to maybe struggle in his first big league start. Doesn't have that overwhelming stuff that can just blow hitters away as he's kind of figuring it out. Gonna not have a ton of room for error at the big league level, and with no experience at the AAA level, this is kind of a big leap for him. Giants have come out of the gates really hitting the ball very well. It is a pitcher-friendly ballpark, which suppresses the run total, but it also, I think, makes the Giants a sneaky stack. I think they're going to be lower owned But we saw yesterday they hung a big number against Alex Wood in that bullpen. Granted, it's a lefty, but they've also put some numbers up on righties. They had a big day to open the year against Willie Peralta. So guys like Brandon Crawford, Brandon Belt, Matt Duffy, Pedro Buster Posey, Joe Panic, all these guys are in play. Denard Spahn. So definitely have some strong plays there. On the Dodgers side of things, gotta love the lefties against Matt Cain. Matt Cain gave up over a 400 WOBA to left-handed batters last year. They got 3 lefties in their first 4 lineup spots. So that's Chase Utley, Corey Seager, Adrian Gonzalez, all in play, very stackable. Even some of the down order guys like Jock Peterson, maybe Carl Crawford in play just because Cain was so bad against left-handed batters last year. And Peterson did hit a home run yesterday, which is promising. I mean, it's just 1 at-bat, but coming off of last year's struggles in the second half, kind of looking strange, adjusting his swing in the spring. That home run definitely is maybe a bigger deal for him than for most, since he's a guy that's really kind of trying to figure it out.
Yeah, and I think looking at this game, there's a lot of intriguing options. Obviously, the weather and the ballpark factors are going to turn everyone off of this game. But I think, you're looking at some, if the weather holds up, some decent cash game options as far as Corey Seager goes. Still one of my favorite shortstops on the slate. Also I think because Tulowitzki is right there, I think it's going to drive some ownership down. I think people are just going to look at those Joe Kelly numbers and target him with Tulo at that price, even though he's, not off to a strong start this season. But yeah, I think if I'm using the Giants hitters, it's going to be in a stack. I don't think I'll be using them as guys, as one-offs in like cash games or GPPs. It'll just be all or nothing with those hitters.
Yeah, and that makes sense since they are a lineup that doesn't really thrive with the long ball. If they're playing well, it's because all of their guys are stringing hits together. They're getting on base, and that lineup synergy is a big deal for them. So you're getting those RBIs and runs and hits all cobbled together and all on your team. I guess the one name that I would consider from the Giants in cash games would be Brandon Crawford, just because of this, and only on FanDuel. And that's because he's under 3,000 compared to Seager at over 3,500 and Correa up at $5,000. That salary relief, you might need it. But otherwise, I'm with you. Would be stacks and GPPs with them. The Dodgers certainly the more cash game friendly plays because you can use them as one-offs. Utley on DraftKings, not so much on FanDuel because he's just so close in price to Zobrist. But Adrian Gonzalez, top play at first base for me on both sides, price considered. So those are the guys that I'm looking at in that contest.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you there. So that's going to wrap things up here with the slate breakdown. Check out dailyfantasycafe.com for all our great tools and content.